Welcome to another edition of the Inside Indiana Report. I'm Ed Magoni. This is Zach Osterman. We're sitting outside of Memorial Stadium once again. We just finished up a press conference with some of the defensive players, some of the defensive coaches, and Coach Wilson. The guys just finished up with their first practice of the 2 days for today on Tuesday. And Zach, yesterday we had a unique opportunity to actually go in and see some real practice, not just the stretching that we usually see, but we actually saw some formations and actual contact, although they weren't in full pads. We saw them in half pads. Any kind of impressions you could draw off that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general impression was that I think we got a pretty good look at what the rotations are right now, what the depth chart looks like right now. I think we saw a pretty distinct first and second team on the offensive line. We saw a nice rotation of running backs. Darius Willis still isn't in there, still isn't healthy according to Kevin Wilson. But we saw Matt Perez in there. D'Angelo Roberts, the freshman out of Bloomington North, got a lot of snaps. I think we've talked about him a little bit as a guy who's gained a fair amount of muscle, or at least it looks like he's put some bulk on his body this summer. The wide receivers were hard to pin down because there was a lot of rotation there, but we saw that the quarterback battle was probably trimmed down to 3 guys, to Roberson, Wright Baker, and Keel. Saw a lot of freshmen in the secondary. Didn't get a great read on the linebacker spots because they were doing essentially exclusively passing drills, and they were doing a lot of nickel. So we saw a lot of Donnell Jones in there as the nickel back, as opposed to seeing who was maybe in that third linebacker spot or anything like that. But we got a good idea of, sort of what, an early rough 2-deep probably looks like for this team.
You mentioned the freshmen quite a bit there, D'Angelo Roberts, some of the defensive backs. Any impressions early on who may be able to contribute this season, or are they all going to be able to contribute? Or?
Yeah, I think yelled a little bit there, but I think the guy that I was most impressed with yesterday is a guy I'm not sure is going to be able to find the field. Cody Latimer, wide receiver out of Ohio, 6'3", really well-built kid. If you're near him, you're impressed by just how strong he looks physically for a freshman. Made a couple great catches yesterday. But, at the same time, I think Ken and I were talking about this, Ken Bykoff and I were talking about this yesterday. Dre Muhammad does nothing but go out during practice and make great catches and make good plays on the ball and, get open and things like that. And yet, it's hard to see exactly how he's even going to find the field. They've got Belcher is obviously, you would think sort of penciled in as that number one. We saw a fair amount of DeWeese Wilson yesterday. You'd assume that he's competing for probably that other starting spot on the outside. I thought Kofi Hughes did some really good things in traffic yesterday out of the slot. I was impressed with Muhammad. I was impressed with Shane Wynn, the freshman. There are guys in that receiver core that I think are very good. Jay McCants as well, that maybe just through sheer depth won't be able to see a lot of the field this year. I think where you're going to see a lot of freshmen is going to be in the secondary. I think you're going to see a lot of Michael Hunter, a lot of Kenny Mullen, probably some Mark Murphy. We got a chance to even see redshirt freshman out of Cathedral, Jake Sapanchik, yesterday. I think you're going to see that first team really kind of seemed it was Lawrence Barnett, Jarrell Drang, Chris Adkins, Greg Heben. First team plus Donnell Jones really experienced that sort of second layer seemed very young. And they've talked, I think the coaching staff has talked since the summer about how they think that some of these freshmen in the secondary are really going to compete for playing time and are really going to earn their way onto the field, whether it's on defense or on special teams. And then you mentioned Roberts. He was getting as many snaps, probably even more snaps yesterday with what we saw, and they were rotating all 3 quarterbacks in. They were rotating everybody. It didn't seem like they were rotating guys based on teams. It seemed like everybody was getting the same amount of snaps at the first team offensive line for the most part, particularly Keel and Wright Baker. It seemed like the receivers were just kind of rotating on their own schedule. But I think we saw as much of Roberts, maybe more of Roberts than any other running back yesterday, quite frankly. And I think he looked, fairly good. I think that the way Hugh Kellenberger, who used to work for the Herald Times and also covered high school football here in town, described Roberts to me once, was that he's one of those guys that's really good at turning a negative 2-yard loss into a 3-yard gain. You don't notice those things, but they sort of pile up. And I think we saw some of that yesterday. A little bit of elusiveness. I think Wilson called it a little bit of spunk. And he can move the pile for a guy his size. So I would not be at all surprised to see him in the mix early at running back.
Anything, the 3-way quarterback race obviously is still in its preliminary phases here as they start to narrow down like the field. Like you said, they're down to 3 from 5. But any impressions yesterday based on, just seeing those guys throw for the first time in live drills?
Yeah, I think we saw what Kevin Wilson has talked about with Trey Roberson. He's a playmaker. He doesn't look like a freshman. He showed really good pocket poise, I thought, for a guy who's made a living as a mobile quarterback in high school and even now into college in a sense. I still thought Keel and Wright Baker both looked more comfortable, both looked more consistent yesterday. I think I wrote last night that if I had to pick one based on what I've seen, and we should say we haven't seen a whole heck of a lot, but based on what we have seen, I think Wright Baker might have a slight edge, and I think that's something that others have said as well. I think Jerry DiNardo mentioned something similar to that when the Big Ten Network stopped for its tailgate tour this weekend. But I think those two guys are really close together, and I don't think Roberson's out of it, but I saw those guys looking more consistent, more accurate yesterday than Roberson. So I think those three are all still in it, but I think if you were kind of grading it, I'd put the 2 redshirt sophomores, in one category, and then Roberson a little bit further down, at least based on what we saw.
Do you think that's more of a byproduct of their experience and being here in the spring and picking up on the playbook more, that they're more comfortable in the pocket right now, or do you think it's just general? They've been here, this is their 3rd year, it's his first training camp. Yeah,
I think it's probably both. I think Ed Wright Baker, I think Dusty Keel's moving really well in the pocket. I think Ed Wright Baker is as accurate as I've ever seen him. So I think it's a combination of just the fact, they were here in the spring, so they've been exposed to it. They had the whole summer to work on it and the whole summer to work with their teammates. And it's also, they've been in college for 3 years. They know how to play college football at some basic level. They know how to approach the game. They know how to approach a playbook. They know how to approach different drills. And obviously there's always ways to get better, but, they just kind of have this intrinsic experience that Roberson just isn't going to have yet. And that's not a factor of him being less talented or anything like that, having less potential. It's just that, they have a working knowledge of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis that he's still developing. And I think we've heard Kevin Wilson sort of talk about that. I'm not sure if my point is exactly his point, but I think we've heard him sort of talk about that he's still a freshman. He's still learning. He's still probably a little bit in over his head at times. So, I think it's probably a combination of both of those things.
Any impact that the offensive line, their ability to pass block, will have on this race, do you think? If they can't pass block, do you think they go with a guy like Roberson, or does that not affect the decision?
Well, I think that'd certainly be something I think we would need to ask Greg Fry, the offensive line coach, to an extent. Because at the same time, you've also, for all of our viewers' information out there, I'm from Atlanta. I grew up a Falcons fan, and when Michael Vick was there, they recruited, they tried to get smaller, more athletic linemen in there, both for their run blocking scheme, but also because they knew they were going to have a quarterback who liked to move the pocket, who liked to get outside the pocket, who might need some help blocking downfield, who might need some help blocking more toward the edge. Now the guys that they have in there now, behind Matt Ryan, who's really a true pocket passer, not nearly so athletic, much more sort of, I guess you call traditional, offensive linemen. I shouldn't say they aren't athletic. I'm not around the team or the program that much, obviously, but I think that is a concern as well. It's not just, yes, you want a mobile quarterback if you're going to have an offensive line that struggles a little bit, but, you're also going to need your offensive line to be able to handle and manage your quarterback as well. And if you've got a guy who, is looking to get outside the pocket a lot, and, maybe the line can't, isn't quite geared for that, then that's a concern as well. So I think really, whoever performs best at quarterback wins the job. And then I think you build, and this is just my personal opinion, I think you build from around that guy. Because the other thing is, I think we saw yesterday, Indiana doesn't have a lot of proven depth on the offensive line. We saw a lot of freshmen working in that second team. Some guys, even Bernard Taylor, moved over from defensive tackle to work on the offensive line this year. We saw David Kaminsky and some other guys, Peyton Eckert, in that second team. So, I think really you're going to kind of have to, I think Indiana's kind of going to have to play the hand they're dealt when it comes to, forming an offense around their quarterback.
That's all we've got for today. Appreciate you tuning in, and you can always stay tuned here on InsideIndiana.com for all the latest on IU sports. And for Zach Osterman, I'm Ed Magoni. We'll catch you next time.